yourself. Like a cameraman or something. Okay, that's a little bit too tight. I'm just gonna zoom this back out a little. Don't want us getting all cut off. Okay, we're gonna do it.
Sweet.
Okay, short intro.
Yep.
Howdy, folks. Today we got something a little different. I got my good friend Jordan Felix here. He is the brand ambassador. I don't know your actual
Oregon.
title.
So state manager for Oregon.
State manager for Oregon for Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And we're just gonna talk a little bit about whiskey and Uncle Nearest. I'll have a little taste, tell you all about it, and that'll be fun.
Yeah. Love it.
So Jordan and I used to work together at the old Multnomah Whiskey Library, where, as you know, I used to work. And you were the spirits ambassador, I think they called you, right?
Yeah, so opened it with Tommy in 2013 and as the lead bartender, and then slowly they didn't believe in bar managers at that point. It was a strange place, and then after time we finally wore them down, and then eventually Michael was able to be bar manager and I was able to elevate to curator, but I was kind of doing a bunch of stuff all at the same time, and then spirits curator I guess was the final title.
Right.
So wore a lot
in
of hats.
In charge of education and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then after that, you moved on to Westward, right?
Yes.
Which I noticed they redid their bottles recently. It looked pretty cool.
Yeah, they've redone their bottles, whole new brand design, and I'm excited to see the brand moving forward. I was the distillery ambassador and also sat on the blending panel. So
you got to help them do the blends and stuff.
Yeah, which was incredible. It was a wonderful opportunity, and then COVID hit. And I was a national guy locked at home in Portland, Oregon, and things happen as a growing distillery. So got to reach out and speak with the wonderful people over at Uncle Nearest, and really got sold on the whole story, and also really just started to understand, okay, this is a unique whiskey for the landscape right now. Yeah.
Nice. Why don't you? So, Uncle Nearest. Some people. I have viewers all over the world. Well, can you just tell everyone the difference between Tennessee and bourbon? Because Uncle Nearest is a Tennessee whiskey, not a bourbon whiskey.
Yeah. So Tennessee whiskey. So what's really great. So Tennessee whiskey really was codified into law in 2013 by the TTB. Basically, it's codified in that all Tennessee whiskey actually is bourbon.
Okay.
But they go through what's called the Lincoln County process, and they go through this sugar maple charcoal filtration that goes through it. So we finally call it Bourbon Plus, if you will. But now, one of the biggest things though about that is, it's contentious, this title. There are two major producers out of Tennessee that, constantly fight with the identity of Tennessee whiskey. Now, can you create, say, a rye whiskey in Tennessee? Yes.
Of course.
However, you can't market it as a Tennessee whiskey. You can say that it's the whiskey is from Tennessee.
Right.
From Tennessee, but you can't say that it is Tennessee whiskey because that is essentially a GI, a geographical indicator.
Right, like a cognac or
exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah. One of the more infamous ones that also had a debate and contention was Plymouth. With their gin as well, down the Blackfriars,
Because Plymouth had to be making Plymouth, England.
Yes.
Exactly, and they wanted to move their distillery, I think.
Yeah.
So they wanted to get rid of the GI so they could make their Plymouth gin elsewhere.
Exactly.
Because it wasn't very convenient for them to go down to the tip of England to make their stuff.
I think it was an interesting situation in the end where I think everyone was just not happy.
Yeah.
But so to Tennessee whiskey to bourbon, so all Tennessee whiskey, if to call itself a Tennessee whiskey, has to be bourbon. So it's 51% corn, it's the usual. So 51% corn, aged in new charred oak, distilled no higher than 160 proof, all that sort of stuff. So it's just, that usual thing, then going through the Lincoln County process, which is running through that sugar maple charcoal.
And they do that after they age it or before?
It's actually before. Yeah. So it's off the still, and then through this wonderful like sugar maple charcoal situation where they're laying charcoal, the sugar maple trees like in a lattice.
Okay.
And then they're lighting it on fire, and then it's turning into charcoal, and then they're running it through, typically through cloth, and then it's a slow. It's almost like a cold filter, if you will, a cold brew filter, if you will. It's running through, typically starts around 96 hours, and then some take even longer. There are other companies that can't, I don't want to speak to how long their process is, but that is slightly different. So I think what's interesting within the Lincoln County process is that the actual, specifications of how much charcoal, that sort of length of time, and that sort of stuff really hasn't been codified in law yet.
Okay, so that can sort of vary from distillery to distillery.
Exactly, yeah.
Fascinating.
And there's one distillery that's exempt from this, and that is Pritchard's. Pritchard's actually predates all of this whole Lincoln County process. And so they're
from Tennessee originally, but they never did the process.
Yeah, so they can still create Tennessee whiskey in whatever way, and they can call it Tennessee whiskey in whatever the way they want it, but they don't have to go through the Lincoln County process.
For every rule, there's an exception.
Yeah, I mean, I would equivocate it to exactly how you brought it up. Brandy, and then cognac is like that kind of smaller specification.
Brandy plus.
Yeah, brandy plus. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
So speaking of distilleries, I know Uncle Nearest just built they built it a few years ago, I think.
Yeah, we opened it in 2019. It was 270 acres. Like it's huge. It's huge. It's actually it's still a working Tennessee walking horse farm.
Oh, okay.
And called Sand Farms, and basically they still, the stables actually have the single barrels in them, so which is kind of cool. And we've started building out, but basically due to COVID, obviously things shut down, and then I had the honor and the privilege to fly out and reopen stage 2, and that for Juneteenth, which was fantastic. Cool. And we actually got to open 4 nearest ancestors the night before Juneteenth, before the official opening.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
And it's a really incredible distillery. I encourage everyone to look at nearestgreendistillery.com, and you can go through all different parts of that distillery. And we have the world's first ever non-alcoholic speakeasy. And it's because our founder Fawn, her parents are teetotalers.
Okay.
And so they've built this beautiful stainless. It's almost like a church inside. It's stainless glass, and it's a homage to the suffragette movement and the temperance movement. And they went hand in hand. Right. And in fact, Tennessee was the last state to sign on for the women's vote. Huh. So there's an incredible story that's taught through there. And then at the concession stand, we sell like goo clusters and moon pies, everything that's
old-timey.
It's all made in Tennessee. That was all originated in Tennessee, which is really cool. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So why don't you give the spiel about Uncle Nearest himself? Who's Uncle Nearest? What's the deal? Yeah.
So back in September when we started having conversations about me coming on, fully acknowledge this is I am a white man and we're white people, and we're talking about this wonderful story about bringing something out of essentially obscurity and bringing it out to the fore. And so Uncle Nearest is the story of the first ever African-American distiller on record. Now, something that we do specify with this because we don't know.
On record.
Right, so whereas we're talking census records, that sort of stuff, we can corroborate with close to 10,000 pieces of historical data that, this man lived, this man did these sort of things, and that sort of stuff.
Certainly African-American people were making whiskey or distilling this whole time.
Spirits throughout. Right. And so basically the story goes that Nearest Nathan Nathiris Green was born in 1820 in Baltimore, Maryland. Whether we know he was born enslaved, but he was an enslaved man who was brought out to Tennessee. and was part of a farm that was run by a pastor by the name of Dan Cole. And Dan Cole had him making whiskey in an area of the farm which is like a hollow. So a lot of, like in Tennessee, they have a lot of hollows. There's kind of like a sort of a hill with like a sort of stream and that sort of stuff. It's a natural geographical sort of thing.
Right.
When you go to Tennessee, or for the people who are watching this, and maybe you've already been to Tennessee, it seems like a massive filtration tank. It's limestone everywhere,
right.
And there's wonderful greenery and that sort of stuff. But Nearest was making whiskey for Dan Cole on the corner of the farm. Now, what we do know from historical data is that his whiskey became quite infamous in that area. There were close to 70 other like small little illicit stills. And this, we're talking the time period of around about the 1840s or so, where we're starting to hear about his whiskey. Around this time, there was a gentleman. There was a young boy who was up the road. He was one of a lot of different children, and didn't really know his father too well. Didn't get along with his father too well. He went to go and work as a chore boy on the farm at Dan Cole. Now, back in those days, the church was the center of where everything you got knowledge and all that sort of stuff. Right. He was a chore boy. He went and like looked after the pigs, the animals, like swept and cleaned. But he was always intrigued about the smokestack out at the top of the hollow, and he constantly asked the Reverend about it, badgered him, and then until one day that Dan like took the young boy and took him up, and he introduced the young boy to Uncle Nearest, as they fondly called people of elderly, Uncle Nearest, and he's the best whiskey maker I know. And so he said to Nearest that I want you to teach this young boy everything that you know about whiskey distillation and how to make whiskey. And that young boy was the name of Jasper, who grew up to become Jack and Uncle Jack, or Jack Daniels.
Yes, okay. I was waiting for the shoe to drop on that.
And so, if the story goes, there's data about how they used to sell the whiskey to returning soldiers from Civil War. After the Civil War, he was emancipated as well. Now, around this time, as we know from historical records and that sort of stuff, and I alluded to the temperance movement before, Dan Cole, the Reverend, was given a kind of an ultimatum. He was either to go with his flock or be a bootlegger of whiskey. And
I see.
He was essentially asked by his wife to essentially give it up. And he kept with his congregation, and he sold the identity and rights to Dan.
I see.
About Jack Daniels. And so they had to move the distillery. So
because it couldn't be on this guy's farm anymore.
Exactly.
Because temperance, and he had to be a preacher or whatever he was.
Exactly. Right. Now, that's where we see that Jack moves to the Lynchburg area, further down in that, while the Dan Cole farm. I actually got to go to the Dan Cole farm. It's very cool. You actually go up into the house and you can see JD like actually scratched into the wood, and they've managed to preserve it on that side, cool. Which is really cool. But they set a different site, and he extended, and this was a very rare thing at the time. Jack actually extended the invitation for Nearest to become the distiller of this whiskey, and he passed on that because he was a newly freed man, but he did have his sons, and his sons, George, was actually the first distiller for the current Jack Daniels.
Oh, cool.
And so you'll actually, if you go to the Multnomah Whiskey Library now, there's a painting commissioned for George.
Oh, cool, cool.
Yeah, we don't actually know.
One, I think.
Yeah, it's a new one. It sort of sits in the middle right next to the Phloxera bug.
Okay, yeah.
But we actually don't know what Nearest looks like. There's not photography back then. There's also another reason that we could attribute to the reason why he didn't move on. Around that time, we also saw from a technical view That was when we shifted from pot stills and we were starting to move into those Kentucky columns. Okay. So those large columns. So that was new technology for an older man to learn. Maybe
he's like, I don't want this newfangled column stills.
Yeah, could you imagine telling Jimmy Russell to go and learn something? Yeah.
Hey Jimmy, it's time to switch to the new thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the Suns continued with Jack, and basically 1884, we know from historical data, and the significance of the small batch that we have here is the last year that Uncle Nearest actually laid down barrels. So we know from historical data from the Lynchburg records and also through the Tennessee records that was the last year. You actually see the picture of the farm right up here, the Dan Cole. That will actually be going away soon as we will be moving to our new insignia of our distillery, which will be great.
So they're going to change the label when they start getting more of the juice from the new distillery.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I think we started this saying opened in 2019, and it's so they're not. So this stuff isn't going to be the whiskey from that distillery as of yet.
Right, and I think we talk about this whiskey is from we've sourced. I think there's a big difference between source and contract. Right. When you source and you do certain things, like you may get the materials and then change it for your own, and then you're able to create it for yourselves. So we do a tail end of our own stuff. So we blend and we filter.
So you can source a barrel and you can maybe finish it in some other barrel or blend different barrels together that they wouldn't have done at the source distillery, for example.
Exactly. And then from contract, that's where you just as is. Do you know what I mean?
I think contracted refers to, like, if I was a person wanting to contract distill, I'd call you the distiller and say, here's my recipe. I want this much corn, this much rye. Can you make me this mash bill or whatever?
Can you? And then that happens often with a distillery like MGP, for example, that utilizes that. And I'm trying to think of a good example of that, but I don't want to incriminate incriminate myself or anything.
I think Michter's does contracts?
Michter's might be contract, with KBD maybe.
I think so. They're building a distillery too, I think, though.
Yeah, I think it's all done now, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. I feel like being out of the game.
It's hard to keep track of all
I've been out of the game a little bit.
Yeah.
So, cool. with all stories, they get lost in obscurity. I think a lot of people can talk about he was a black man, that might be a part of it, but also I think Jack became synonymous with a bunch of other things. So Frank Sinatra was what helped big into Jack Daniels. Those sort of things happened, and so in 2016, a very famous whiskey writer by the name of Clay Risen wrote an article from essentially sourced from a Brown-Forman pack on Black History Month in the New York Times, and that caught the attention of our founder and our CEO, Fawn Weaver. And Fawn Weaver was a New York Times bestseller out in California. And instead of going to France for her 40th birthday, her and her husband went to Lynchburg and went to see if there's more of this story, and started to talk with the people there. And as she went through some of the records, descendant of Jack, the Motlows, came over and started asking questions and saying, I hear you're wanting to look into the history of our family and that sort of stuff. And basically Fawn said this simple answer: if this story is not about love, honor, and respect, I don't want to tell it. And she was so taken by that answer that the Motlows actually opened up all of the things. So we had full access of trying to trace this story and to come back in 2016, 2017. And so she was able to link in with the descendants of Nearest Green. One of them being the most prominent, who is now our master blender, who wasn't at the time, but Victoria Edie Butler, who just actually won Master Blender of the Year, which is an incredible honor.
And she's an actual descendant of Uncle Nearest, the person who was the original person who taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. Yeah, amazing.
And which is an amazing thing. And it took a little convincing for Victoria to come on, but she was she'd been in law enforcement and government details, but she was able to come over, and this is her baby. This was where she led off. She's still involved obviously in the 56, but this is really her 1884 is something really special. She is Nearest's great granddaughter. A direct line, and basically has come on and works with another incredible woman in not only Tennessee whiskey but also American whiskey, and her name is Sherry Moore. And Sherry Moore was actually what was fascinating around the time that Fawn had went. She went to go and ask about the Dan Cole farm and was surprised to find out that Jack didn't own the farm. So they were able to purchase the farm.
Oh, I see.
And so Fawn was able to purchase the farm, and the real estate agent who sold it to her was Sherry Moore, who is a great niece of Jack Daniels.
Wow.
So as you start to talk about Lynchburg, I may have gotten that wrong, Sherry. I'm sorry, but she's descended from the Jack Daniels family.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected. So Sherry actually, as Fawn talked with her about it, Sherry agreed to come on if they were going to build a whiskey, and Fawn went to the descendants of Nearest and they said, what do you want to do? Do you want to do a commemorative bottle? Do you want to do a book? Do you want to do, a movie rights? This is a fascinating story. There's a lot more here. And they said, we just want to create a whiskey that sits next to Jack. And so Uncle Nearest was born.
Nice.
And, there's so many other things that are part of it, but we should probably try the whiskey, right?
Yeah. First, I'm going to pour you a little water.
Yeah, totally.
I need a little water, too.
Yeah.
Maybe tell me the difference between these two different bottles. They've got... Because one is 1884 small batch, and one is 1856 premium.
Premium, yes.
And I was looking at these in the store, and I was like, what's the difference between premium and small batch? And
sure. Well, small batch is like it's kind of like green. It's greenwashing some stuff. What is small batch?
There's no legal definition for small batches. Some of you may or may not know. It's just a marketing term, basically, to say we're doing this in. It's like calling something artisan. Or
exactly.
Handmade.
Or handmade. Or some sort of like greenwashing, if you will. But but for whiskey. Here's the thing. Like the major differences that I know. While whiskey, and I vehemently will always argue this, that you shouldn't say that because X whiskey is aged for X amount of years, it's good.
Right.
This is on average a 7-year whiskey, and this is on average a 12 to 13 whiskey. So premium, might denote a little more presence of barrel and more of that sort of a really honey barrels, if you will. Whereas a small batch, you're really looking at least in the mentality of if I was ever to think of if I was starting a whiskey brand and that sort of stuff, I wanted to call it something small batch. Well, is it a batch? What is a batch? Is it going to be small? Well, yes, I'm going to be starting out with a small batch. So, I think that's really where it's coming from. But on average, 7 years, on average, 12 to 13, 11 to 13, 12, basically 12.
That's good information.
So that's and the other major difference is 93 proof, 100 proof on this one. Right. So there's, there are differences with that as well. But every single bottle of the 1884 is signed with Victoria's signature on the back here, which is really great. I love, I think what sold me on everything. I mean, there's so many things that sold me on not only the story, but what we're doing. And I'll touch on the philanthropy on next. But, as in terms of the whiskey that got me there was the 56. And then the 1884, what I've notably seen is we've just been improving. Like we've just gotten better as blenders. We've gotten better as stewards of whiskey, and really starting. And it's really led to not only awards but more critical acclaim for it as well. So, yeah,
cool.
All right, so
let's open these up.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have much Tennessee whiskey?
I don't tend to drink a lot of Tennessee.
Do you feel like Jack polarizes a lot of people about Tennessee, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are... I mean, Jack Daniels is... I don't think a lot of people think of it as, like, the best whiskey.
Right, which is so crazy to me, because when you do really think about it, it is pretty much... You could pretty much argue, you can tell that I'm not pouring professionally anymore. You can really...
I kept these in orders.
Oh, yeah. 1856.
84, 56.
Wonderful.
56.
You know, it's funny when we talk about Jack because I think it is contentious because like you just see it everywhere. Like you can go to the foothills of the Himalayas, you can and then
it's
be
like
here.
Coca-Cola.
It's like Coca-Cola. Yeah, exactly. Johnny Walker Black, and I would argue like Jack Daniels, like pretty much on every single bar in the world.
Right. I mean, we were in Italy a little while back, and like the only bourbon they had was Jack Daniels.
Yeah, and that's another really important thing about Tennessee whiskey, by the way, for the international viewers. Like, Tennessee whiskey is not recognized outside of the U.S.
Right.
So there's an identity. So when people say Jack Daniels is a bourbon, you don't need to correct them because it is technically true.
Right. Yeah.
It's technically true.
Right. Right.
But we, within the U.S., we're obviously fighting for that identity. You know what's funny though is like chatting with a lot of the distillers out of Tennessee. They're getting used to this new GI. Not a lot of them we're not 100% sold on it, with a lot of them. I think we just want to say Tennessee makes great whiskey.
Right.
And which is very true. And there's some great new examples coming out through, Dickel has a new 8-year bourbon coming out. We have the wonderful people at Nelson Greenbriers. We have a bunch of different Tennessee distilleries out there that are fantastic. And us, obviously, in the mixture with that.
Right, for
yeah.
sure. Cool.
Yeah, so let's try the 84.
84 first?
Yeah.
This is the 93 proof.
93 proof. So a little bit higher. Do we talk about prices or not so much?
We can. We haven't.
So
I think the Prem is a little bit more.
Yeah.
45 or
remember. This one is actually $49.95
$49.
and this is $59.95.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Got that mixed up.
So but you'll find in California around like high 30s, mid 40s, yeah.
Oregon's got its whole own system for pricing and whatnot we've discussed in the past. I mean, it smells a lot like bourbon. It's very,
yeah.
Corny.
Yeah. There's a lot of like graham cracker for me.
Yeah, like breakfast cereal almost.
Yeah. Definitely like reminds me of how Kieran Elliott of the Macallan brand ambassador would always say, Macallan 15, that double cast or that triple cast, whatever. It's like a breakfast whiskey because there's just so many like Cheerios or honeyed nuts sort of noises. You do smell that a lot from wonderful bourbons and American whiskeys.
You do get a little bit of honey on there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like old times. I mean, Jordan.
Yeah.
Trying to describe whiskeys. I haven't been drinking a ton of whiskey, so I don't always trust my palate. I've been trying to do I'm doing a lot of rum lately, but it's really hard. It's hard to get the vocabulary going, when you don't do it all the time.
Yeah. It's you definitely. It's like riding a bicycle. It's just one of those things where you're coming back on. I would say even coming over to the brands, just. It was amazing at the Whiskey Library to have all of those different options constantly be there and sort of just like
we're always tasting such a range of things
all the time of just like either sip and spit it or just go ahead and sip and really try to appreciate and understand provenance and the importance of transparency and the importance of romance of whiskey and that sort of thing as well.
All right, I'm gonna give it a try.
Cheers, yeah.
Slonge. I mean, I'm gonna call it a soft. It's not a lot of burn.
No.
Get more of that honey, like a nice sort of sweetness, like a back of the palate kind of sweet.
Yeah. I love the sort of real nice vanilla bean note sort of coming through.
And it's it lingers a bit too. It hits
really
it's very sippable.
Very sippable, very approachable, sort of hits that mid palate. One of the things that we do additional to some people, when they ask, okay, you're not making every single step of the process. What are you doing as a source? What we do after this Lincoln County process and maturation is we do 2 separate filtrations. We go through a diatomaceous earth which is natural form silica. It's really removes some of those esters and congeners that will from the distillation and also fermentation, less so from fermentation, but from the after the distillation that sort of might give you a massive headache, in the way you're doing it. So sort of softening it out. So running it through a silica that's tiny, less than 0.3 micron, running through that. And then we also do a charred coconut husk filtration. The coconut doesn't impart into it at all.
Flavor, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about it though with people because they go, "Oh, I can taste coconut."
Yeah,
and you go, "No, that's just me suggesting that through
that happens all the time too, I bet."
So yeah, we go through 2 rigorous filtration steps after that. Yeah,
is that a common thing to filter with coconut husks? I don't remember hearing about that before.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of brands. I remember, in particular, the vodka that we did at when I was part of House Spirits and now Westward. Volstead is run through charred coconut husks as it goes through. It's the world's best occurring, naturally occurring filter on the planet, and it's excellent in picking up unwanted, offset smells and esters and all that sort of stuff.
That's neat.
Yeah.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah.
All right, well, I mean,
what I love about it is Victoria Edie Butler, she, coming into this world and being taught by Sherry and other people throughout the industry on how to blend and how she does things together. I love that her palette is sort of this just beautiful mid palette, which is often what happens, particularly in my experience near edging on to 20 years in this industry, is that you tend to see a lot of whiskeys go for that punch up front or punch in the back, but don't really look for the quaffability, the sessionability of a whiskey and be able to use that really dangerous word, smooth, as you come through.
No one likes that word.
No, yeah.
But yeah, if you think about Scotch, a lot of the Scotch will be how smoky can we make it? Can we make it even more insane?
Yeah.
Whereas this is not really trying to be an insane.
Yeah.
It's trying to be a very drinkable, approachable.
Well, one thing I was taken by, I'd never been to Tennessee before, and when I went out there in June, what took me back was that everywhere had rocking chairs. If you had a porch or a veranda, there was somewhere someone who would literally sit out on the porch and the veranda, and I would imagine sit with either a whiskey or a drink and that sort of stuff, and sort of take in beautiful sunsets out there as well. And I just the way the life is sort of that top part of the South is really just speaks to slowing things down.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
sit out there in your rocking chair and have a Uncle Nearest.
Yeah.
Should we try the other?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, 1856 premium. You said it was
on
average 12 years.
Yeah, on average
100 proof.
And 100 proof. Yeah. So basically these two, we've had wonderful partners in being able to source out. So this is from Tennessee Distilling Group out of Columbia, Tennessee. We have an NDA with this particular source here, but we go through the same filtration methods for both.
Okay, it's essentially an NDA on this, so non-disclosure agreement, so you're not going to say who makes this, which is fine.
Yeah.
But they both go through the same coconut husk and diatonomous earth.
Yes.
Got you.
So it goes through those filtrations, and I would stack it up to next to any bourbon and that sort of stuff. Do a blind. I'm very. I've done a recent blind tasting with a whiskey account here, and Uncle Nearest won blind, which was fantastic with this particular one that sat next to it. Makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Makes me feel really good. Yeah.
So how long until the juice from their distillery gets put into the bottle? And is there some way to know when they switch the label, will that be the new stuff, or like is there some way to know? Oh, this is this is the old stuff and this is the new stuff. Or anything
so
like that?
we'll see the core farm come off before we switch to our own. So full disclosure, we're making our own whiskey.
Right.
It's sitting around about a 4-year right at the moment. Where typically we've seen from Tennessee around about a 7 to 8 year is kind of that sweet spot.
Right.
So we're doing it right. We're just doing it right. We decided, decided as the company that most small producers maybe release a vodka or a gin to raise capital and allow to create a whiskey distillery. That's one way of doing it.
Yeah,
Another
absolutely.
way is actually taking that time and looking at some of the wonderful options that are available within the American whiskey industry and utilizing that, making their own, and then moving on from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Then there's the extremely expensive option that Westland took, which is build your distillery, start distilling, and just spend money for 5 years until you finally put out a whiskey.
Yeah, and it's really interesting now watching Westland. They're now phasing out all those three, and they're trying to eventually, at least from my understanding, move towards their whiskey that has some sort of provenance from Seattle. So Seattle and Washington. So Skagit Valley, peat smoked from up there and that sort of stuff. I think they're moving towards that in the next couple of years. It's going to be interesting to see that American oak flavor, that the American oak one that they do, as their flagship, is going to change dramatically in taste profile. Yeah.
They've been doing a lot of interesting blending experiment things. Whenever I get up there, I try to go to the distillery and get some weird bottle, but a lot of them they're amazing.
They're amazing.
They're so good.
And what I love about Matthew Hoffman and the whole team up there, and we'll come and visit 56 in a moment, but they've been really wonderful in... so one of the big things that we set up at the start of last year is called the NJII, which is the Nearest Jack Advancement Initiative. And
right. Yeah. I saw this on Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so what it is basically it's an advancement initiative that equally is put in by Uncle Nearest and Jack Daniels to allow for on-the-spot training, scholarships, kind of education for people of color who are interested in brewing or distilling and going on. And one of the more prominent people to come through the first wave is Tracy Franklin, who was previously the national brand ambassador for Glenfiddich, and she's come on and learned a ton at wonderful distilleries throughout the US. And to loop it back in, she's been at Westland for the last 2 weeks, actually learning with Hoffman about everything they're doing up there and all the new distillation techniques and grains and different fermentation styles and yeasts and all that sort of stuff, which has been a wonderful thing. And it's something that one of the many things that we do as a company and as a brand and now as a distillery as well.
Yeah, so back to this.
Yes.
We got a little off track there.
So 1856, 800 proof. The significance of the number, so the 1884 is the last, as we know from historical data, the last year that Uncle Nearest laid down barrels. 1856 is the last, as we know, that Nearest helped perfect the Lincoln County process. Now, he wasn't the person to invent it, and I want to stress that.
Okay.
Because a lot of people will be in the comments, it's not true. So let's sip this, and then we can talk about the Lincoln County process a little more.
I mean, similar. A little hotter. I don't know, a little longer. A little more lingering.
And
a little more vanilla, I guess.
A little more vanilla. I think it's also I get a little bit of toffee, like burnt toffee, if you will. Chocolate really comes through nicely in that sort of not like milk chocolate, but like chocolate powder.
Cocoa powder.
Like a cocoa powder that comes through really wonderfully. There's a little bit of mint on the nose, but it doesn't translate to the palate at all. What I love about the 56 is it's sort of this one that is exactly as we were talking about. These two whiskeys are designed to be sipped on.
Right.
It's like quaffability, like sessionability, like able to sit there, have it on a cube or neat or.
I mean, I would drink this neat for sure. I would consider an ice cube for
this 100, one. Yeah, for the 100. That's typically how I do it. I usually have a cube for the 56. I love the versatility of the 84. This one is really incredible with citrus, so it makes a great whiskey sour. Gives a different note than your usual bourbons that would be able to create for that, but. Yeah, so 56 is a year from historical data that we know that Nearest helped perfect the Lincoln County process. Now, this is one aspect of whiskey production and it's another aspect of this whole whiskey landscape, is that it's another part of the process that doesn't get talked about, and that's filtration.
Right.
And so, you talk about, like, fermentation, so beer, right? So you've got grains found wherever in the world. Distillation, you've got your column still, you've got your pot still, you've got all different coffee still, you've got all these different kinds of stills and that sort of stuff. The technology for filtration maybe doesn't come from your white genus areas throughout, but rather from West Africa. And what we've seen through historical data at Nearest, and we still have people who are pouring through documents and that sort of stuff, is that filtration in whiskey here in the United States more than likely started with the African American people who were helping make these spirits as they went through. So filtration, and we saw the way that traces in through West Africa, the processes that the same sort of process that they utilize in filtering and purifying water. In that time that dates way back before of any of these other whiskey processes. So what's really awesome to see is that, like, this is the other contribution that we're not talking about with whiskey making, that as we build the case for it, it's this more inclusion, this inclusivity of how we understand how whiskey and the whiskey world is made. There was a whole, with George Washington having his, people argue George Washington actually didn't distill.
Right.
He maybe had some help there.
Some
employees so far. This is the sort of conversation as we push forward to sort of have a look at how we've made whiskey in the past, how it can inform the future and moving forward, which is really great. Yeah.
I mean, people don't talk about filtration. It's not a very romantic, selling point for the whiskey or whatever. And so,
but
the innovators in filtration aren't like heroes of the whiskey world,
right?
But they should be.
They could be, because when you think about the amount of absolute craziness about people talking about filtration, chill filtration, which is the most ridiculous thing. I guarantee some of the whiskeys, maybe some of your first whiskeys that you've had was chill filtered, and you didn't know.
Right.
And what only became an issue a little bit until the present day, where they were like, well, if it's non-chill filtered, then it's the closest thing to it. Horseshit. Sorry to swear on you there. But some whiskeys lend itself to chill filtration, and some others don't.
It's just like a decision that you would make as the producer as to whether or not you want to chill filter it, depending on what you're going for.
Yeah.
For example.
I mean, I'll give a perfect example of a whiskey or a independent bottler that we both love, or generally at the Whiskey Library we loved, and that's Blackadder. Blackadder was their whole shtick was basically they were taking the casks unadulterated and bringing in and including the large big chunks of pieces from the cask that's in
not
there.
even filtered coming out of the barrel.
Coming out of the bottle. So you would pick up the bowl and you'd see these big chunks all the way through. And that was their big thing. And I mean, it's a gamble to do something like that. If someone sees that up on there, doesn't know anything about it.
Doesn't want that.
What's
this weird junk floating in my whiskey?
Exactly. Right. And these particulates. And so that's one who's sort of rode that sort of way moving forward. Unfiltered sort of a way. But then you have things like, Johnny Walker, for example, is a really great example of like some people's first ever whiskeys were chill filtered,
Sure.
And it's to adhere a sense of consistency all the way through.
Right.
And I think, what's interesting about the Lincoln County process is you're running it through sugar maple charcoal, before it goes into the barrel, and while it wouldn't remove all particulates, and also the barrel obviously offers particulates afterwards, and that's why you do an additional 2 other filtrations after that to sort of keep looking, or you can chill filter. That's the other option as well.
I mean, coming off the still, it's not going to have any particulates in it.
No.
What we're filtering out in the Lincoln County process is certain congeners, flavor compounds that maybe you don't want.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get unwanted compounds coming off the still. It's just depending, if you're not a great distiller, there's sometimes you get some unwanted compounds that come off there. And what I particularly come to think of the Lincoln County process is, any misses within the fermentation process and the distillation, you can then sort of suddenly reset the off flavors off the new make spirit before you put it into barrel.
You can sort of tweak it before it goes in the barrel.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it's that really interesting consistency that you wouldn't necessarily find in bourbon always. Now, bourbon is a completely different animal in the way that they do things. Also, by the way, it's important to note that there is evidence in history that Kentucky did utilize some form of a Lincoln County process. While it wasn't Lincoln County because it didn't originate in Lincoln County, in Tennessee, there are documents that there were filtration in Kentucky.
I mean, I'm sure when people were developing bourbon, or when it was the Wild West of doing whatever you want.
Yeah.
People did all sorts of experiments, right?
Yeah.
They would have they heard about this thing they were doing in Tennessee. They would have tried it.
You're right.
Why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they? Yeah.
It just didn't catch on or become a thing.
I mean, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio, around all of those mid 1800s to like the pretty much the up until Prohibition, I mean, thousands of distilleries, small little distilleries. They're just all illicit stills. A lot of them. A lot of you would hear a lot of moonshine, some, but often just whiskey distilleries as well. Or little stills out the back of making off the back porch, if you will. Yeah,
fun.
Yeah, one of the big things, with all of this is that Fawn, as heralding back to what she said to the descendant of Jack, to Mrs. Motlow, is if this story isn't about love, honor, and respect, I don't want to tell it. She's been true to their word, and so has the group. So Uncle Nearest is run by a private entity called Sydney Grant. You're more than welcome to look it all up. There's private investors all the way through, and some not so private. But basically, Fawn set up with the group the Nearest Green Foundation. So everyone who's descended from Nearest basically has a full ride scholarship in school, is able to have educational assistance available to them. And this Nearest Green Foundation has produced some amazing people so far. Some that I actually got to meet before the stage 2 of opening things up. We were also there for that horrible tornado that went through Nashville last year, providing masks during the start of the pandemic and putting that through. We've also, the NJII, as I mentioned, the NGD. We've also started this venture fund. This venture fund is $50 million going towards black-owned spirits. So we will have a hibiscus liqueur that has joined our portfolio. It won't be here in Oregon until next year, but it's called Sorrel, and it was and it's by a gentleman by the name of Jackie Summers. He was the first black man to get a distiller's license since Prohibition. He was based out of Brooklyn, and he's utilizing a 500-year-old hibiscus liqueur recipe from Trinidad and Tobago, and he's making it out there, and it's incredible. And I can't wait to share with Pete and a lot of people here in Oregon once I get it in my portfolio.
Nice. Sorrel is a hibiscus sort of drink they make at Christmas time in Jamaica.
Yes.
From like hibiscus flowers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made some last Christmas.
Oh, awesome.
For fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. It's not a liqueur exactly, but it's...
Yeah, it's taking that idea and making it into a liqueur. And I'll make sure, I've got a bottle here, so I'm happy to share that with you. Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. Just keep an eye out for that one.
We'll put a link to that sorrel, this video where I made sorrel last year.
Yeah, please. And I'll shoot you the link for Jackie as well. It's fantastic. And then we also have a a rum that will be helping join us at the end of next year was Equiano as well.
And that's these are products that are
Going to join essentially
owned by the same people who own Uncle Nearest, but
Yeah.
it's sort of not produced by Uncle Nearest.
Yeah, it's
per se, but just
from the venture fund and the money
I
goes
see
to
the private investors are investing in these other companies.
Yeah,
gotcha.
and then there's a board that sees over all of this. So there's a separate board that sees and allocates all these funds towards everything. So
Neat.
it's an incredible company that really is thinking about the future and moving forward. We've also, it was just announced, we purchased more land around the property to actually plant our own non-GMO corn.
Oh.
So we've got non-GMO and organic corn that's going to go into that area and for future generations as we build cement this legacy, and as you'll see it more and more out there in the market. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a lot of information. In conclusion, Uncle Nearest is delicious Tennessee whiskey. They're a good company doing lots of good works to try and buoy up the community of various types and all around the place.
Yeah.
I'm really into it. I'm gonna thank Jordan for coming over and sharing it with us.
Thank you, B. Yeah.
And cool. We'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. This is great.
Awesome.
This is going to be a long video.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Feel free to edit as much as you need.
I'm gonna.